Good morning and welcome to the first virtual event for the Reading Agency Presents series this year. The Reading Agency is a charity with a mission to empower everyone to read. Evidence shows that reading improves health and well-being, life chances, and social connections. And the Reading Agency champions access to the proven power of reading by providing activities for all ages, working with public libraries, hospitals, prisons, and other community settings. And they reach over 2 million people every year, which is a really phenomenal number. And we're delighted this morning that you're joining us for the Reading Agency Presents. This is a series where the Reading Agency introduces you to some of the most exciting writers and illustrators of children's books and gives real opportunities to engage with big ideas, brilliant stories, and to get creative. We know we've got schools and libraries signed up and watching us from across the country, and also many who'll be watching us on Catch Up too. So hello to everybody. And do please let us know in the chat where you're watching from using the chat function. So today we are massively excited to welcome Clare Povey, author of The Unexpected Tale of Bastien Bonlivre, which was selected as the Waterstones Children's Book of the Month, and was partly inspired by Claire spending time studying French and living in Lille. Claire is also the author of the new gripping, immersive and submersive The Wanderdays, where Flo and Joseph are trying to piece together just what's happening in the intriguingly titled Fantome Island. We have an absolutely fantastic session for you this morning. Claire will talk us through vile villains and evil intents. We'll have a quiz and an opportunity for you to create your own villains, which can be used to spark your own stories. And we'll also save some time at the end when you can ask any questions you might have for Claire. So do get your thinking caps on and use the question box for those, please. Claire, thank you so much for joining us. A huge welcome, and it's a real pleasure to hand over to you for what promises to be an absolutely super session.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Jake. Such a lovely introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm just having a quick look in the chat. People from Manchester, Cornwall, Northamptonshire. Thank you so much for taking time out of your morning. So, as Jake said, my name's Clare Povey. I'm the author of many books, but my latest one, this one here, The Wanderdays. I just realised I've got a blurred background, so that doesn't show too well. But I am going to share my screen now so you can see the cover in all its glory. And I am going to take you through how we build our own villain, because that is what the session is about today. And whenever I am creating a new story idea, writing villains is my favorite thing to do. And I'm going to explain a little bit to you about why that is. So even from the screen here, you can see I've got a mixture of some amazing Disney villains here. Darth Vader, who is one of my favorites. Right, so quick introduction to me before we get on to villains. As I said, my name's Clare Povey. I was born and raised in a little town called Barking and Dagenham, which is just outside of London. That picture on the left there is me, age 6, on my first ever trip to Paris, which, if any of you have read my first book, The Unexpected Tale of Bastien Bonlivre, that was hugely influenced by my passion of learning languages when I was little. I have no idea where I got this passion from learning languages from, but I think it sort of set the course for what my life and my career would end up. I always loved words. I've loved learning different languages. You know, wherever I go on holiday, still to this day, I try to learn a few little words. Words have just been such a big part of my life. So even though I didn't know I was going to end up being an author, I've always loved learning languages, loved telling stories, loved traveling. There's a little picture of me there about 10 years ago now, atop the Grand Canyon. There's me in the middle, actually in Paris a couple of years ago, holding up both of my books in the Bastien Bonlivre Adventure series. I went on a little tour of Paris, and I got to go to all the different landmarks where my first 2 books feature. And then, yeah, finally today, that's me. I always, whenever I do a school visit, I ask people to guess how old I am. But as this is virtual, I won't do it because we might be here all day with some wild guesses. But I am, yeah, 31 now. So I've got 3 books under my belt. These are the 3 books in question. So as I said, The Unexpected Tale of Bastien Bonlivre. This idea came to me, and it sort of feeds into why I love villains and characters so much, is because I had a character name for my main character and a character name for my villain. So the titular protagonist here, Bastien Bonlivre. Now, Bonlivre in French literally translates into good book. So I had this idea about this boy who was an incredible storyteller. He'd inherited this amazing skill of writing and telling stories from his parents. And I knew that I wanted to have a very bookish main character. And then I had to think of a villain, and I came up with a villain's name called Olivier Odieux, who I'm going to talk about a bit more shortly. But odieux is another French word, and that literally translates to odious or horrible. So again, Oliver Horrible. I love talking about villains' names and how you can put little clues in their names and signpost that they are going to be the villains of that story. So these first two books, sort of mystery adventures, they were set in Paris in the 1920s. And my villain, Olivier Odieux, is a best-selling author who had one good idea many, many moons ago, sold loads of books, was incredibly famous, and then no new ideas ever came to him. But instead of maybe hanging up his writing boots, he decides to steal other people's ideas. So these two books are actually based around a series of kidnappings of other writers who go missing throughout Paris. And it's Bastien, along with his friends Theo and Alice and Sammy, who try to find out where these kidnapped writers are hiding in Paris to save them and to expose Olivier as the villain that he is. And now when I was coming up with that idea for the villain, as a writer, I thought, what could be more villainous than a writer who actually doesn't write their own stories, just stealing other people's ideas? So it was quite a simple little idea, but I got to have fun with it and make it really big. And when I talk about creating your own villains, you can never go too big. I think, you know, writing villains, it really gives you a chance to just be as imaginative as possible. And then my third book here, so the one that just came out last month, The Wanderdays, Journey to Fantome Island. As Jake said, the two main characters are brother and sister duo, Flo and Joseph. Their mum is a famous explorer and oceanographer, and she goes missing during a latest expedition in the ocean. Now, Flo and Joseph know that it's very unnormal for their mum, and they actually find out that their mum was going to find this island, Fantome Island, this secret island owned by this man called Sir Frederick Titan, who is the villain in my new book, The Wanderdays. And I won't go into too much detail about him yet, because I'm going to talk to you all very shortly in my next slide about the inspiration behind him. Because when I tell people who my inspiration was, Sir Frederick Titan, sometimes they look very shocked and angry at me. So I will explain that in a second, but I'm going to leave you on a little teaser for that. So why do I like writing villains so much? I think because villains, whenever I sit down to come up with a character idea, I remind myself that villains are people too, and they can be as deliciously complex, funny, frustrating, daring as the main characters that we write. And now I always say, whenever I go into schools and do creative workshop writing, I want my characters to feel three-dimensional, and that's true for villains as well. I don't want them to feel flat. I don't want to give them, you know, these stereotypical traits of villains that we might have read in books when I was certainly younger. Sometimes there'd be a huge emphasis on, you know, evil witches, and it would be how they looked. And for me, personally, I know that writing a villain is really important, not to portray them as villainous through their appearance or their identity. Those things I think are very tired and old, and there's no place for them really in writing today, because I think the focus, what makes someone truly villainous, is the things that they believe and the things that they do, their actions. And I always remind myself as well that villains don't think that they're villains, right? You ask Lord Voldemort if he's doing the right thing, you ask Darth Vader, they'll say yes, because they believe that they are the heroes of their own story. So that's something that I always keep in mind. So as I mentioned, I want them to be fully fleshed out, my villains, and I don't rely on stereotypes. I always remind myself that villains also have positive and negative traits. And these are the villains that I think, as a reader, if you're someone who reads loads, or if you're someone who also loves playing video games or watching movies, the villains that we probably connect with the most are the ones that we love to hate. And how we create that love for a villain is actually through showing a bit of a balance, showing that they're going to have positive as well as negative traits. They might want world domination, but they might still adore their pet kitten. this sort of thing as a balance just makes the character feel more believable. So as I said, just to echo that again, because I feel that's a really important point for me, as a writer's job, we're ensuring that villains are portrayed as terrible, not through their appearance or their identity, but the things that they believe in and they do. And if there's one thing that I love for you all to take away and remember, you could forget everything else that I'm saying today, but that is a really important point that is really close to my heart. So I've done a brief introduction to Olivier Audur already, so I'm just going to tell you a few little more facts about him. So as I said, his name was the first inspiration for creating him as a villain. Because I know when we're creating villains or any character, it can feel quite overwhelming, right? To think, I've got to come up with a character. I've got to create a backstory for them. I've got to give them a full personality. You know, you have to create everything about this person just from your imagination. So I take a lot of inspiration from real life and history, and I knew that I wanted my villain in these books to be a writer. And so I turned to the internet, my local library. I went and I read up about a lot of literature and about how there was authors who used to steal people's ideas back in the day, or, you know, authors who have secret identities and pretend to be writers when really they've got someone else writing for them. And so for me, the name, I found the way into writing this. And now Olivier, he's a middle-aged man, and I always say it's really important to have random facts about your villain. He's middle-aged, he's never once said please or thank you. And that was something that I wrote down on a little piece of paper. And when I was writing these first two books, I made sure to always remember that random fact about him, because that helped me when I was writing him, making sure that every scene, every interaction he has with someone, that I'm making sure that he is coming across as rude, because it was that little random fact that doesn't necessarily make it into the book. But I knew as the writer, I always sort of think of it as an iceberg, right? You see the tip of the character, like the tip of the iceberg just above the water, the really important things that you want your readers to know about them. And then you have the rest underneath the surface, which you as the writer need to know. I always say, even for a villain, you need to know what they're having for breakfast. You need to know how they're walking down the street, how they might treat a waiter in a restaurant. All these sorts of little facts are really important. And so for Olivier, yes, he is the middle-aged brother. He's got two brothers. He's got an older one called Louis, who sort of serves as his agent and does a lot of his dirty work for him. And he's also got a younger brother called Monsieur Xavier, who heads up the orphanage in the first two books where Bastien and his friends live. And now, when I was creating him as a villain, a really important question I asked myself was, do I want him to work alone, or do I want my villain to be part of a team? And I knew for these books, it was really important for me to have my villain surrounded by a team. Because the thing about Olivier, I wrote a list of words, like descriptive words, adjectives of what I wanted him to be. And I knew that I wanted him to be a charming yet manipulative villain. And for that, I knew that if he was so charming and manipulative, he wouldn't actually do any of the dirty work for himself. He would get his brothers to do it. And so that is how I slowly built up this idea of him as a villain. He's very charming, he's very manipulative, but you could perhaps also call him slightly lazy, because he actually doesn't do any of the kidnappings himself. So when I was working on my next book, The Wanderdays, I knew I wanted to come up with a different sort of villain. And as I said, the Bastien books, they are historical fiction in a way. They're set in the 1920s in Paris, over 100 years ago. Whereas in the Wanderdays, I got to come up with my own world, which was a challenge, but also really fun. And now Sir Frederick Titan is this much-loved TV presenter. He's considered a bit of a protector of the natural world. And he had this TV show called The Titan's Tour, and he would travel all over the world with lots of experts. So, you know, marine biologists who can study the ocean, naturalists, people who work in rainforests, different kind of climates, lots of different scientists who were able to perhaps help fight climate change. And so in this, the Titan's Tour, Sir Frederick Titan, he was kind of the front, you know, the leader of the group, and he pretends to be this amazing natural protector of the world, when in reality, he is living a double life. And now the inspiration, the idea of this came when one day I was sitting down and watching a documentary from this guy here. I'm sure all of you will recognize who this man is. Yes, Sir David-Attenborough. I love all of his documentaries, and I was watching Blue Planet and I was listening to him talk. You know, David Attenborough, he's so intelligent. He's got such a soft yet really powerful voice. And in my head, the little perhaps devious part of my head as a writer, I thought, what if one day I could write a book and I would have a character like Sir David Attenborough, but I'd make him evil. And I think I was watching it with my partner at the time, and he turned to me and said, you can't make Sir David Attenborough evil. He's like the nicest man in the entire world. But then that's when I knew I was on to a good thing, because it's such a conflict. It's the opposite of what you might expect someone like this to be. I thought, right, I am going to steal perhaps some parts of Sir David Attenborough's personality and use that for inspiration for my new villain, Sir Frederick Titan. Because I don't believe, full disclaimer, Sir David Attenborough definitely is not living a double life, but I wanted to create a character who would, because we can all imagine if we woke up tomorrow and the headlines were, you know, Sir David Attenborough responsible for cutting down trees in the Amazon forest to make money, all of us would be shocked to our very, very core. And it was that idea of, I want to create a villain who doesn't outwardly appear to be a villain. He's actually the complete opposite. Many people call him, and in the Wanderdays, they refer to Sir Frederick Titan as an Earth hero. He's the absolute opposite. You know, he's a villain masquerading as a hero. So I just wanted to use that as an example to show that you can take inspiration from anywhere, really. You can take inspiration from even people who you consider to be heroes. You know, in an alternate universe, I'm sure many of us watched the football last night, Gareth Southgate, bit of a hero. What if you somehow came up with an evil football manager for a story idea? You know, anyone, you can turn anyone into a villain. So if you're someone who feels, really struggle to come up with just ideas off the top of my head, look around the world, look at your interests. That's what I always say. There's so much good stuff for a writer to turn towards the things that interest you. So I've always loved nature. I've always loved nature documentaries. And in that, I found the little kind of spark of an idea that helps me to create my villain in the Wanderdays. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the 9 questions that I ask myself when I'm building my own villain. Now, these are taken from the worksheet that the reading agency have kindly provided you all. And that's something that I really hope you do in your spare time or after this session, because these are 9 questions that I came up with when I was writing my first ever book. And I still use these 9 questions now whenever I'm creating my new villains. So I'm going to take you through the questions, and then I'm also going to give you a few examples of how, you know, the answers that I came up with to these questions for my villains. So the first question is always, who is your villain? What is your villain's name? So as I said before, coming up with a villain off the top of your head can be quite difficult. So that's why I always say turn to your interests. If you're someone who's really into football, you're really into baking, you love dancing, or, you know, you love going for walks with your dog or any of your other pets, look into that and see what you can use as a villain. Like I said, you could come up with an evil football manager. You could come up with a dog napper. In a baking competition, you could have another fellow baker who will stop at nothing to win and will sabotage everyone else's amazing cakes. Look towards the things that interest you, and I promise you, from that, you will find an idea, the starting point really, for your own villain. Then obviously, what is your villain's name? Now, if you're someone like me, I love dropping in little clues about my villain from their names. So Olivier, Odieux, odious. Even Sir Frederick Titan, the fact that I wanted to make him a Sir, I think this showed that he's very respected. You know, he's been knighted in this world that I've created. So actually, when people discover the true extent of his double life, it's even more shocking. Obviously, Frederick's a bit of a normal name, but, you know, Titan, I gave him that really strong surname that's got a lot of connotations with, you know, the ocean and gods. So I was putting all these little hints into Sir Frederick Titan's name to make readers realise he's going to be an important character. So you could come up with something like that, but I also say you could always come up with a really simple name. You know, Bob Smith, John Smith. Give them an ordinary next door neighbour name so that perhaps it's even more shocking when they're revealed to be the villain. So I implore you to have a lot of fun with names, because I think it's one of my favourite parts, coming up with the perfect name for a character. The second question I always ask is, what are 2 random facts about your villain? And I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'm just going to expand on it slightly, because coming up with these random facts, it helps something writers call character development. And by character development, I mean that learning everything you possibly can about your character so that they feel 3D, like I said before, 3-dimensional on the page. And so random facts that I have about both of my villains, I've given you the example that Olivier Audieu's never said thank you or please. He also has a golden statue of himself in his living room. Now you might think, what might that tell you about him? Obviously quite self-obsessed. And then I have for Sir Frederick Titan as well. He's an earth hero, but I know every night for dinner he eats a massive plate of seafood. Now again, what might that tell you about him? He doesn't really care if someone's a bit of a nature lover, especially as kind of their reputation about being obsessed about the ocean, but they're eating a massive plate of seafood. That tells you that he doesn't actually really care and he's a bit of a fraud. So again, I don't think that actually goes into my book, but that was just something that I kept in my head. So when I was writing, I knew to make sure that his character reflected these ideas about him. Third question, what does your villain want? So every villain's going to want something, right? And you can make that as big or as small as possible, whether that is world domination, whether, that is revenge, whether they want to break into a museum and steal this really incredible artifact. Have a little think about sort of things that your villain can want. So obviously in my first books, Olivier Audieu wants to be the best-selling author in the entire world, and it's this want that drives him to do some really terrible things. So Frederick Titan as well, I always say what he wants, and we talk about motivations for a villain as well, motivation, the reason why someone does something. And so Frederick Titan is absolutely 100% motivated by reputation. He wants to continue growing his empire. He wants to make more money than ever possible. And he kind of wants to beat nature in a way, which is a bit of a silly thing. But that is the kind of want that I hold in my head when I was writing him as a character, because he thinks that he is above nature. He thinks that he's above the world, and he's just going to make as much money as possible. So you could go for a very classic villain want like that, money, power, revenge, or you could make it a specific want. Next up, I always say, how is your villain going to get what they want? What is your villain's plan? So every villain needs to come up with a plan. And so in my one, in the Bastien Bonlivre books, Olivier Audieu decides to become the best-selling author by stealing other people's ideas. And his plan for doing so is to kidnap authors. So when you're coming up with a plan, you could have a little think about what sort of obstacles actually might get in the way of that plan. And that leads me nicely on to the next question of what is stopping your villain from getting what they want? And that does normally come in the form of a hero, other characters. So for example, in the Wanderdays, when Flo and Joseph Wanderday find out about Sir Frederick Titan's double life, they then become the obstacle to him ever getting away with it, because they become determined to, find their mother, save their mother, and also expose Sir Frederick Titan. So you can have a little think about what sort of obstacles might stop your villain from getting what they want. You can also make it silly. Like I said, you can have a serious villain. You can also have a bit of a silly villain. You can have fun with it. You might have a villain who wants to own every cat in the world, but is somehow still allergic to cats. And again, having an allergy, being allergic to cats might make that plan particularly tricky. So again, it doesn't have to be this big, the world's going to end, I want world domination. You can go big, but if you're also someone who likes, those slightly more quiet stories, that is absolutely fine. This is your story. And the best thing I say about this, when you're writing and coming up with ideas, there is literally no right or wrong. Writing, that is the best thing about writing, and why I love writing and telling stories so much. There is no right or wrong. You are just sharing what is in your head. And I think it's a beautiful thing. So Don't put too much pressure on yourself to get it right, because again, there is no right or wrong. Next question. What 3 adjectives best describe your villain? Now, again, this is something that I just ask myself so that I can build them in my head as a character. Earlier, when I referred to that character development, that's exactly the same thing. So I always make a list, again, whether it's on my laptop or on my phone or a piece of paper that I find from somewhere, back of a receipt, I'll just scribble down certain adjectives. So for Sir Frederick Titan, again, I've got charming. I've also got, two-faced, but also selfish. You can build up these sort of adjectives. They can be negative, but they can also be positive, like charming, right? As I said, finding that balance between the positive and the negative adjectives. So when you create your own villains, make a list and think of as many descriptive words as you can about them. And just having that to hand, if you then choose to perhaps can go on and write a story, which would be amazing, you can keep all of these to hand so you can make sure that your villain is reflecting that they actually are being these words that you have come up with them for. So next one, does your villain work alone or have a team? Now, you might be someone who likes a lone villain, someone acting by themselves, or you might like other books, video games where there's like a team of villains. So it's entirely up to you. I've been able to do both now, which I quite enjoyed. So for the Bastien books, as I said, Olivier is their middle brother. He gets his older brother Louis and his younger brother Xavier to do all of his dirty work for him. So even though he's the one ordering the kidnappings, he never does any kidnapping himself, which means when the police come a knocking, he can say, I had nothing to do with it. So again, making that decision as to whether your villain works alone or has a team could then influence the story, could then influence whether your villain actually gets caught or not. So you could have that, but also in the Wanderdays, Sir Frederick Titan is definitely a bit of a lone wolf. He lives in this amazing mansion. He has got like a right-hand man. He's got some servants, staff, people that work for him. But in all honesty, he's truly alone with himself most of the time. And that means, again, that there's more chance of your heroes defeating them. If you've just got to defeat one villain as opposed to a huge team of villains, that's going to change the story slightly. Then, next question, what is your villain's greatest strength? Because again, as I said, we've got to find that balance, right? We don't want to make the villain feel like they're really easy to defeat, whether you're giving your villain like physical superhuman strength, whether you are giving them, incredible lying skills. Perhaps they have the ability just to tell so many lies and be believable, or perhaps they're incredibly clever, really great at technology, and have got like an army of like robotic birds at their disposal to do their bidding. You can, again, make your strength something really big or something really small. But if you're going to give them a strength, you also have to give them a weakness, because normally that is what the villain is going to find, what the hero is going to find, what the hero is going to expose. If you're someone who likes it when the villains are defeated in the end, I think most of us do like that. It's a nice resolution at the end of the story. So again, thinking about what sort of weaknesses might you give your villain. Are they, again, like I was saying before, a cat allergy? Or are they someone who has got a real weakness, like the weakness is their pet dog? I don't know why my mind keeps going to pets. I don't have any. I think this is just me. I really want a dog, so I'm just on my head, in my brain all the time. Perhaps, it's their dog, and the hero then perhaps like holds their dog ransom. They've got the villain by the throat, and the villain, will do anything to get their dog back. You can make it really small. And I would say for my books here, my villain's greatest weakness, I would say in the first books, Olivier Odieu's greatest weakness is actually his own ego, because he is so obsessed with being the most famous author in the whole entire world that this really drives him to do nothing, and so he'll stop at nothing. And so normally when a villain will stop at nothing and they'll keep doing more and more terrible things, kidnapping more people, especially like Sir Frederick Titan, he's contributing to the climate crisis. He's poaching animals to make money. He's cutting down trees so he can sell the land off to developers, making money. But the thing is, when a villain really gets stuck in their ways and keeps going for more and more and more, sometimes their behavior or, their tracks gets a bit sloppy, and that's when your hero comes in and can actually find the evidence to expose the villain. So those are the 9 questions that I always ask myself. Again, I'm working on the second book of Wanderdays at the moment, and I'm coming up with a villain, and I'm using these 9 questions as the starting base for it. So it doesn't matter whether you've never written a whole book before, whether you've written 3 or attempting the 4th one like me. This is such a great starting point, and I always return to it. So what I wanted to do now, this is the chance for you all to get a bit more interactive with me. And I'm just going to explain how perhaps best that we do this. So on here, I have got, I think 4 or potentially 5 pictures of some of like the most well-known villains of our time. Now they're from books, but they're also from films and TV. And so I'm going to show you the image. I want you to guess who it is, and we can take an extra beat, a minute, if you want to feedback to your teacher, if the teachers are happy to pop in the chat your guesses. But beyond that, once we all know who the villain is, I want to ask you all a couple of questions about these villains based off some of the things I was talking about earlier. So I would like to know, what does this particular villain want? So what is their want? What is their plan for getting the thing that they want? And those are the 2 questions that I think we're going to focus on for now. But of course, if there's any other facts that you're bursting to make sure your teacher tells me, then please do so and we'll pop them in the chat. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you the first villain, and then I'll give us a minute and I'll make sure my chat is up as well so I can see your answers coming in. And then we are going to break down, who is this villain, what do they want, and what is their plan for getting the thing that they want. So, are you ready? First one. Who is this villain? Oh. I knew you would all know. Absolutely. It is Thanos. So Miss Davies here says he wants world domination. Yes, in a way he does, but he does have a very, this is something that I always know when there's proper Marvel fans in the classroom and they know the specifics. I am looking for the very specific want here that Thanos wants. He does want world domination in a way. And yes, Kamal, he does want to destroy the Avengers. But actually, there is a very specific thing that he wants. He wants world domination. Oh, Miss Davies, he wants the stones. Yes, now I would say he wants the stones is his plan for getting the thing that he wants. And while we keep the guesses coming in, I'm just going to give you a bit of backstory about Thanos, which I think does imply the things that he wants. So Thanos grew up on this planet called Titan, and it was a really, really overpopulated planet. He kind of grew up with, it was a planet where there wasn't enough resources for everyone. Some people were like living in poverty, and he kind of grew up with this chip on his shoulder, realizing that, that was a bad thing. So you're all super close with your guesses, and actually some of them are correct for the plan. But what Thanos wants to do is his main want, because also wants to get his daughter back. I should have been clearer. His main want is to wipe out half of the universe, only half of the universe. And so based on what I just said about his conditions in which he grew up, why do you think, everyone, he only wants to wipe out half of the universe? What would be his motivation for doing so? So he just wants to wipe out the half of the universe. Does anyone want to take a guess on why only half? They'll give us a little minute here. Yes, excellent. And yes, Laura Ball's class, well done. Yes, so there are enough resources for everyone. Absolutely spot on. He wants to wipe out half of the universe so that the other half can live in, relative peace and comfort. There's enough resources for everyone. And this is why I think he's a really interesting villain, because you can sort of understand what he's trying to do, can't you? Obviously, he's going about it in completely the wrong way. You can't just wipe out half the universe, but his motivation, probably starting off, was good, but somewhere along the way of his journey, he has lost sight. He has lost sight of, who he is and what it is that he actually wants. So you're absolutely right. So that is his want. And we have had a few of the answers already in, but I'll just repeat again. So that's what he wants. But what is his plan for doing that? How is he going to wipe out half the universe? If you want to take a minute and pop in, some people have already said what it is, but if anyone else wants to pop in what is Thanos's plan, Yes, absolutely, Lucy. Yes, everyone. With the stones, the infinity stones. Yes. He has to collect all of the infinity stones, which will then give him the power to click his fingers and wipe out half of the universe. Now, the thing about coming up with plans for villains, though, is the writers were smart in that they didn't make it easy for Thanos to collect all of the Infinity Stones, did they? They were spread out across the galaxy, across the multiverse, and that essence, the plan actually of what your villain wants, what villain Thanos wants in that, is then what the whole story is, the whole narrative of the story. He's going to all these different places to collect these Infinity Stones, and each time he goes to a different place, that creates an opportunity for one of the Avengers to stop him. So again, you all smashed it, as I knew you would. Yes, he wants to wipe out half the universe, and the plan is to collect the Infinity Stones. And I always like to include Thanos, because I think, as we can see from this picture here, he's a very strong man, but he's very also calm, collected, and wise. When he speaks, he's very softly spoken. And, he wants to make the world a better place for everyone. He's just going about it in completely the wrong way. So, good work, everyone, on that. Right, next villain. Who can tell me who this is? Now, not everyone might know, because I know it depends on what year group you're in. You might have read the book, but there is also a film, if anyone has seen. If the classes are struggling and the teachers just want to show off their knowledge, go for it. Oh, we've got, yes, they're coming in now. Absolutely. The Warden from Holes. And for anyone who hasn't read this book yet, I will try my best to keep it spoiler-free. But yes, she is possibly one of my favorite villains. So I'll give you a bit of backstory again before I ask what it is that she wants. So the Warden owns Camp Green Lake, which is this place. It's a correctional facility where young delinquent boys who've been in trouble come to Camp Green Lake, and there they are taught to become a better person, to build character. And the Warden's plan for doing this is to make them go out into the desert every day and dig these holes. Now, growing up, the Warden actually was forced to dig holes as well by her great-great-grandfather. Oh yes, Laura just said, we've just been learning about holes in year 5 and year 6. Amazing. I apologize if I'm going to drop any spoilers right now, and I'll try my best not to. But the Warden grew up digging these holes because she wanted what her great-grandfather wanted. And now I'm sorry, it might get a bit spoilery, but does anyone know, what is it that the Warden actually wants? Yes, Lucy's, yes. She wants to find the treasure of the infamous killer. So Kissing Kate Barlow was this amazing bandit, and she buried this treasure years and years ago. And the Warden's great-grandfather was obsessed with finding it. And so in a way, he sort of passed on this obsession to his granddaughter, who is the Warden. So that is her want. She wants to find the treasure. So what is her plan, everyone? Her plan is a very smart one, because she reminds me a bit of my first villain, Olivia, in that she doesn't really do any of the dirty work for herself anymore. What is her plan? Yes, absolutely. Well done, everyone. To get the kids to dig holes. What better way to make all of these boys do the dirty work for her, and she can just be feet up. And now I love the Warden as a villain because she's incredibly powerful. She's very softly spoken again, but she has got such an incredible power and weight. The 2 other men who work in the camp, Mr. Sir and Mr. Pendowski, they are absolutely terrified of her. And thinking back just to those questions that I have in the worksheet, the question of, what's a random fact about your villain? I like to think that when the author Louis Sachar was coming up with the Warden, he had fun with the random facts, because one random fact that I always love about the Warden is that, she always wears nail polish, but in her nail polish, she has got rattlesnake venom. And I think that is just such a clever and brilliant little detail, because it shows, perhaps some of the men that she works with perhaps have got a preconceived notion about her and thinking, oh, she's not that tough. Perhaps she's wearing nail varnish, which is a very outdated view. But as you'll read and see in the film, some of the men that she works with have got very outdated views, but actually they're poisonous. She slaps Mr. Sir around the face and it gives him this nasty little scar from the venom. So yes, I'm sorry for spoiling it slightly for some of you, but I implore you to read the book, watch the film. One of my all-time favorite films. The first book I ever finished, wrote myself, was a complete rip-off of Holes. I've got it knocking around somewhere in a notebook. I basically stole the idea, but did it for like a girls' camp as well. So yeah, it's one of my favorites, and she is one of my favorite villains. Because again, thinking about it, she's so powerful, but she's very smart in how she's going about getting what she wants. She gets all these clueless boys at the start of the book to find the treasure. So good work, everyone. Next one. Who is this? I've got some various iterations of him. Yes. Lucy Cross's class is quick. Good typing record. Yes, it is. It is Count Olaf. Yes, other answers are coming in. Well done, everyone. Count Olaf from a series of unfortunate events. So, again, one of the best villains. I grew up devouring these books. I literally couldn't wait. I couldn't wait for the next books to come out. And there's 13 books in this series, right? So there is a lot. And Miss Davies always said, yes, he wants lots of money. But quite specifically, everyone, what is Count Olaf's particular want? Yes, Miss Murdoch's class. He wants a family fortune. Yes, he wants the Baudelaire fortune. As we all know, the three kids there in that picture on the left looking at their sad little porridge, Violet, Klaus and Sunny, they are the Baudelaires. Their parents died in this mysterious fire, but has left them in a massive fortune, which they will get when Violet comes of age. And now Count Olaf wants to get his hands on the Baudelaire fortune. And when I asked what is his plan for doing so, I would like to say, I know in each book there is a very specific plan that kind of contains to that story. But if we could maybe focus more on his actual plan of doing that, is the picture on the right here, the different get-ups that he's in. Yes, absolutely. He disguises himself to steal the children and then in a way get his hands on the fortune. So yeah, I know there's individual plans in each of the books, but you know, more widely, Count Olaf is this actor, or he thinks he's this incredible actor. In reality, he's not very good, but obviously being an actor, he's got access to a whole load of costumes, disguises. So that is his plan. Each time he disguises himself in a different get-up, whether he's a surgeon at a hospital, whether he's a snake expert's assistant or the ringleader of a carnival. Yes, he comes back in various iterations. So he's kind of using the skills that he's got as an actor to try and get his hands on the Baudelaire fortune. And yes, he definitely does want to kill them, as Rankma has said. You're right. He wants them out of the way as quickly as possible. And what I love about Count Olaf as a villain in these books as well is that the adults are completely clueless that it's Count Olaf. The kids in this book have like this amazing villain radar, which I really enjoy. And I also try and steal a little bit for my books as well, especially for the Wanderdays. You know, I wanted Flo and Joseph and their friends Fumi and Isaac to truly believe and understand that Sir Frederick Titan is the villain. But each time in these books, Count Olaf comes in a total different get-up. He manages to fool all the adults, but the kids are the ones that are smart and realise that it's him. So yes, well done, everyone. I think we've got 2 more. Just want to make sure we don't run over time for questions. But I know that you all know who this is. Who is this villain? Yes, absolutely. Cruella de Vil. Yes, and as you might have noticed from her name, I definitely got inspiration of having fun with my villain's name from Cruella de Vil, because what can you all tell me about her name, right? Feel free to pop in the chat as well. There's all these clues about how she's a villain before you even know anything about this book or this character. Her name alone signpoints that she's a villain. Yes, absolutely. De Vil makes devil. Obviously, also Cruella. You've got cruel in there. You also take off the D. You've got evil. Even Vil is kind of the beginning of villain. So yes, in terms of what she wants. Now, I'm going to stick with the originals that I've put to either side. I know in the middle is the Cruella film, which came out not too long ago and does give us a bit more information and backstory about Cruella. But again, I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen that. But Cruella, yes, she wants to steal all the Dalmatians to make the best clothes. Now, Cruella de Vil is from this really wealthy family, and she is definitely motivated by reputation, I'd say. They lose all their money. She wants to be seen in this glamorous era still. So she is going to kidnap all of these Dalmatians so she can make the best clothes, so she can still look fashionable for doing so. And now when we talk about a plan, what would you say is Cruella's plan for this? And how does she go about getting the Dalmatians? Is she someone who works alone, or does she maybe have a team? I don't know if there's any thoughts that you'd like to share from various iterations of 101 Dalmatians. Yes, she has a team of 2 men. She sort of has like the classic henchmen, doesn't she? Yes. So she sort of clicks her fingers and gets them to do all of the dirty work for her. So again, she is a great villain who definitely stood the test of time. And we talk a bit about backstory for villains and perhaps things that have happened in their past that perhaps makes them behave a certain way or believe certain things. So if anyone hasn't seen the new Cruella film yet, the one in the middle, I think it's on Disney, I definitely recommend checking that out, because if you are interested in developing your own villains, that film is a really good lesson in how to create a backstory. So, final one, I believe, finishing on a bit of a classic character here. Who is this? Yes, Miss Trunchbull. Amazing. So, Miss Trunchbull, what does she want? And I actually think this is interesting because I don't think necessarily there is a clear, specific want. I just personally, in my own opinion, we can share opinions here, I just think she wants power, a world without children. Yes, absolutely. And you're right, that actually does make sense. But ironic, given that she's the head teacher of a school, right? There's a line in Matilda where she says, "Nasty, filthy children. I'm glad I was never one of them." Like, you know, she's hates children so much she is denying that she was ever a child, which is impossible. So yes, she definitely wants a world without children. She wants to use the fortune from Miss Honey's father. Yes, great knowledge of the backstory there. Yes, there's definitely, you know, there's kind of inklings in Matilda that she's done something bad to get the fortune from Miss Honey's father. What perhaps is her plan for a world without children? And feel free to share this, but I also wanted to quickly touch on the strengths and weaknesses of Miss Trunchbull, which I really enjoy because she's got this physical, superhuman strength, right? But I actually think she has got a really clever weakness. Now, can anyone tell me just to finish on, what Miss Trunchbull's weakness is? Cats, that's a part of it, right? Very specifically, chocolate cats, black cats, if someone's afraid. Happiness. You know what, these aren't the answers I was looking for, but they're actually spot on. Yeah, happiness, Newts, Agatha. Yes, but there's something that I would say Miss Trunchbull is. So if someone's afraid of black cats, maybe there's someone who's also afraid of like stepping on cracks in the pavement, maybe afraid of ghosts, maybe wouldn't walk under a ladder. Yes, absolutely. Superstitious. And I think this is a really clever weakness that the author gave Miss Trunchbull, because so much is made of her superhuman physical strength that actually to be superstitious, to be kind of afraid of these sort of things that aren't really tangible, that we can't hold on to, grasp, or can't see, is really clever. So that is a great weakness to give your villain, I think, especially if you're coming up with a villain who's like really like, I don't know, is like an army leader and is meant to be someone who's really strong, but actually they're really afraid of like little black cats, little black kittens. So yes, those were my villains, and I'm aware we only have 10 or 12 minutes left, so I could talk about them all day. But I hope that really helps you to think about what motivates villains and also the things that they might want and their plans for getting that. And again, that's something that you can do on the worksheet, and I'm sure we'll mention at the end, but just to mention now, through the reading agency, I am very happy to be sent any of your wonderful worksheets so I can see some of the creations that you've come up with, because I truly love nothing more than reading about other people's villains. So please do feel free to send those on. But yes, if there are any questions, I will stop sharing so you can see my face in full. But thank you so much for being amazing listeners and also being so quick with the chat responses. I knew you would know all of the villains, but some good knowledge on this call today.
Definitely agree with that. What a brilliant, insight into villainy, and some superb knowledge from everyone. And we've got some fantastic questions flying on already, Claire. So the first one of those is, if you had world domination, what would you do first? And what do you think Bastien would do?
Oh, really good question. If I had world domination, what would I do first? I would make sure, maybe a Robin Hood-esque sort of answer. I would make sure that everyone in the world had enough money and had enough resources. I wouldn't achieve that by wiping out half the universe like Thanos. There's more than enough to go around, and I would make sure that everyone had enough that they needed to live a good life. And I'd also make sure that all books are free, but also authors got paid. So, you know, we're not losing out on stuff, but also that every book in the whole entire world was free and everyone could read anything that they wanted at any time. So yeah, a mixture of those two things. But Bastien, what do I think Bastien would do? I also think same with stories. As I said, his parents were storytellers. He's inherited this amazing skill of storytelling from them. So again, that's sort of like his, you know, that's his heartland. So I think he would want to, I don't know, help everyone tell their own story, which sounds a bit cliche, but I can see him being an amazing teacher actually, because he's like incredibly kind and compassionate to other people. So I feel like maybe he would create some sort of like, I don't know, story wing of the government, like a story department. How great would that be? And something like that where people could come in and tell their stories and everybody could be published and everybody could have their own book.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you. And I love that idea of stories being free and books being free.
Yes.
And our next question sort of ties in with that because it's talking very specifically about Sir Frederick Titan, who's an amazing villain.
Oh, thank you.
Karen Murray is wanting to know what Sir Frederick Titan looks like. Can you give us a bit of a clue around that?
That is a really good question. I was just having a little flick through to see if I had an example of what he looked like. So and I should add that Flo and Joseph's mum, the famous oceanographer and explorer I mentioned, Nellie Wanderday, she was once part of the Titans, this kind of eco expedition team that Sir Frederick Titan headed up. So back in the day, you know, he looked very, I did sort of base him, I must admit, I also did steal Sir David Attenborough's looks. I did sort of base the younger Sir Frederick Titan on what Sir David Attenborough looked like when he was young. So very smart trim hair, you know, maybe a little like golden chain, always wearing a nice like shirt, looking very smart. But in this book, in the Wanderdays, when Flo and Joseph, you know, actually they are invited to Titan Towers, which is Sir Frederick Titan's house, when their mum goes missing because Sir Frederick Titan wants to help them find her. Flo and Joseph are quite actually surprised to see how much he's aged because obviously he's much older now and he's a bit of a recluse. And so I added, again, I try not to focus hugely on appearance because I also do like to let readers' imagination, but I did add a few little touches in terms of, you know, he had kind of a nice hair, but now it's all very white and overflowing. He's got, you know, a bit of ear hair that looks a bit like sprouting cauliflowers. You know, he's got some age lines around his face, so he's slightly worn down. But I wanted to show that through the appearance because that was also something that he might look worn down, but he's still very much a villain. So again, it was the idea of peppering in these few little examples of how he's aged, but actually he's still really powerful. But yes, when you do read it, Karen, just think of Sir David Attenborough because that is what I was going for.
Brilliant, thank you. And on a related note, Miss Davis' class are interested in hearing about your favourite villain and also conversely to hear what you think about heroes.
Oh, lovely. So who is my best villain? I don't know if you mean from my books or, but I'll do both. So I would actually say I did really enjoy writing all my villains, but maybe because it's the one that's freshest in my head still, I did really enjoy writing Sir Frederick Titan, just because I really enjoyed like thinking about the depths of like that double life and how shocking, you know, for example, if someone like Sir David Attenborough, you know, there was a news article on him being, you know, I don't know, polluting or poaching animals, like it would just be so shocking. And I just had, yeah, I had a lot of fun making him what I'd say like nuanced. Like, so like as I said before, right, there's different shades of villainy. It's not just good and bad. So I had fun coming up with him. But villains from just in general, I love a good kind of trajectory. So I put him on the first slide for a reason. I love a bit of Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader. I'm a huge Star Wars nerd, and I really just love his story because again, it's not as simple as just good, bad. There's things that happen. There's things that happen throughout his life that shape him. And that's what I like about a villain, because I think it's very easy for a villain to actually not be a villain. It's very easy, you know, a villain could go down, we all walk that same path, and then there's a little fork where villain and then heroes go. So also in answer to Miss Davies, you know, heroes are super important, but I also like to write heroes that also are flawed, because again, I keep the same energy for all my characters. So villains have good traits, but they're also going to have bad traits. Same for heroes, right? They're going to be the heroes of the story, that they're also going to be flawed, because find me a perfect person. So in the Wanderdays, we've got, you know, Flo and Joseph. Flo is very brave, but she's also quite bolshy at times. She doesn't always think. It's sort of like her way or the highway sort of thing. And then again, my character Joseph, he is quite anxious. He gets, you know, a lot of kind of anxious and worried thoughts, and that's something that I wanted to include, as, you know, that was what I was like growing up, still am to this day. So I wanted to show that, you know, he was sort of a reluctant hero. He perhaps went absolutely out of his comfort zone as they then kind of travel across the ocean to Fantome Island to find mum. But it's not all plain sailing, and it's not something that he takes to, you know, he can worry, he can spiral, and he can get into arguments, but at the same time he can also be really brave and go on this kind of journey to find his mum. So yeah, I find it's just a balance, because we've all got positive and perhaps negative traits. So I try and keep the same energy for whoever I'm writing.
Brilliant, thank you. And Kamal is wondering how long you've been writing books for now.
Oh, really good question. So officially, since, well, the first book, Bastien Bonlivre, got published in 2021, but I have always been writing. As I said before, I would start writing stories, like my mum would probably tell you, from a ridiculously early age, but it's just not possible. She's just got that proud mum energy, because I'm sure it's not physically possible for me to have written a full story when I was 4 years old. It was probably like a line. But I've always loved writing stories, and I would start off just kind of copying stories that I love. So growing up, again, I loved Winnie the Pooh, but Piglet spoke more to my soul, as, you know, a little, very cute, but a little worried, anxious soul. And so I remember writing stories where Piglet was the main character instead of Winnie the Pooh. And then I also, as I said, I kind of wrote Holes, but instead it was like a girls' camp. So I'm always someone who's enjoyed writing. But I definitely had quite a big gap from when I was writing as a kid, and then obviously going to university. I didn't prioritize it, because as we all know, life can get busy. And sometimes we really want to do something, but we've got it on our list, but we never quite get there. But it was only really having started work about 8 or 9 years ago, after I finished university, thinking about what I wanted to do. I actually just had the idea for Bastien, and I thought, actually, I want to write this. And the only thing I would say, all of us have got ideas and stories within us, and I do think truly the only difference is actually writing it down and getting it finished. That's always what I say, and that's the best bit of advice I can give to anyone as well who out there and is like writing. Just try and finish it, because once you've finished one story, it makes you know that you can do it again. You know, I've still got notebooks full of half-finished, unfinished ideas, but when I know that there's something that's really interesting and it kind of can't leave me alone, even if it is rubbish, I just write it down, because I think you can go back to it, you can edit it, you can make it look better. But you know, that's that classic saying, you can't edit a blank page. So yeah, I've always loved writing, and I'm now just trying to get obviously more into a habit of finishing the ideas that I come up with.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really inspiring point on which to end, actually. You know, the idea that we all have stories that we can tell, and that we can, you know, if we sit down and finish those. So a huge thank you, Claire. Like
my absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Like everyone watching, the Reading Agency Presents is going to be taking a break for the summer, but we will be back with more exciting events come the autumn, so do keep your eyes peeled for those. In the meantime, over the summer, you might like to take part in the Summer Reading Challenge. This year's theme is The Marvelous Makers, and with all Claire's fantastic hints about villains and creating villains, we've had a taste of creating our own sort of stories. So yeah, do take part in the Summer Reading Challenge. And yeah, a huge thank you again to Claire, to all of you for joining us, and for a very engaging morning. Happy reading, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.